The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Margaret Sullivan sat quietly in the gallery, her hands folded over the small curve beneath her loose cardigan. At 58, she had learned patience through the years, though today tested every ounce of it. She had been married to Robert for 33 years. 33 years of building a life together, of raising children who were now grown with families of their own, of tending a garden that bloomed faithfully each spring. They had weathered storms before, but nothing quite like this. 6 months ago, everything changed when Robert confessed he'd been seeing someone else, a younger woman from his office, someone named Crystal. Margaret had felt her world tilt that day, but she steadied herself the way she'd learned to do over decades of life's unexpected turns. She thought of her grandmother's words, dignity, Margaret. Whatever comes, carry yourself with dignity. What Margaret hadn't known then was that she was already pregnant. At her age, it seemed impossible. The doctor had smiled gently when he told her, acknowledging the miracle and the complications that might come. Your body remembers what to do, he'd assured her. Robert had been stunned by the news. For a few beautiful weeks, Margaret had seen something rekindle in his eyes. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the weight of responsibility. They had talked about trying again, about what this unexpected blessing might mean, but Crystal had other plans. The young woman, barely 32, with carefully highlighted hair and a wardrobe that cost more than Margaret's monthly grocery budget, had filed a lawsuit claiming Robert had promised to leave his wife and marry her. She wanted compensation for what she called emotional damages and breach of promise. It was, Margaret's lawyer had explained wearily, technically possible to bring such a suit in their state, though rare these days. Most judges dismissed them quickly, but this one had made it to court. Now Margaret sat in that courtroom, listening to Crystal's testimony, watching the younger woman gesture dramatically as she described her heartbreak. He told me he loved me, Crystal said, her voice rising with practiced emotion. He said we'd be together, that he'd leave her. Margaret noticed the expensive handbag at Crystal's feet, the designer shoes, the jewelry that caught the light. She thought about her own worn purse, bought at a clearance sale 5 years ago and still perfectly functional. Crystal's lawyer, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, nodded encouragingly. And then what happened? Then, Crystal said, turning to look directly at Margaret with an expression that might have been pity or might have been contempt, she got pregnant. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Crystal's voice grew louder, harder. At her age, can you imagine? It's almost, well, it's irresponsible, isn't it? She's nearly 60 years old. What was she thinking? Margaret felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her hands steady, her breathing even. Dignity, she reminded herself. She trapped him, Crystal continued, warming to her theme. The courtroom had gone very quiet. She knew he was planning to leave, so she got pregnant to force him to stay. It's manipulative, it's cruel, and now I'm the one who has to suffer because she... Miss Hayes. The judge's voice cut through Crystal's monologue like a knife through silk. Judge Eleanor Hartwell was a woman in her mid-60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that had seen enough of human nature to rarely be surprised by it anymore. Crystal stopped mid-sentence, turning toward the bench. Yes, Your Honor? Judge Hartwell removed her reading glasses and set them down carefully on the papers before her. The gesture was deliberate, almost ceremonial. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the hushed. Courtroom. Miss Hayes, I have a question for you. Of course, Your Honor. The judge leaned forward slightly. How many years were you married to Mr. Sullivan before his wife allegedly interfered in your relationship? The courtroom remained silent. Crystal blinked, confusion crossing her face. We weren't married, Your Honor. We were... How many years did you stand by his side, in sickness and in health? The judge continued, her voice still gentle, almost conversational. How many years did you wake up next to him? Not just in passion, but in the ordinary moments. When he had the flu, who brought him soup? When his father died, whose shoulder did he cry on? When he lost his job 10 years ago, who worked double shifts to keep the house? Crystal's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, I don't see... Judge Hartwell raised one hand, and he sat back down. Her eyes never left Crystal's face. "How many Christmases did you host for his extended family, Miss Hayes? How many of his children did you help raise? How many times did you choose to forgive him when he made mistakes? Because that's what you do when you build a life with someone." Crystal's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since the hearing began, she seemed to have nothing to say. "Mrs. Sullivan," the judge said, turning her gaze to Margaret, "how long have you been married?" Margaret's voice was steady when she answered. 33 years, Your Honor. 33 years, Judge Hartwell repeated. She looked back at Crystal. "Miss Hayes, what you're describing isn't a marriage that was broken by a pregnancy. It's a marriage that existed long before you entered the picture, and based on the evidence presented today, one that has weathered this storm better than your relationship with Mr. Sullivan weathered it." The judge picked up her glasses again, putting them back on as she reviewed the documents before her. "You claim emotional damages because Mr. Sullivan chose to stay with his wife when she became pregnant. But from where I sit, what I see is a man who, when faced with his responsibilities, made a choice. Perhaps not the choice you wanted, but a choice nonetheless." She turned to Robert, who sat hunched in his seat beside his lawyer. "Mr. Sullivan, do you have anything to say?" Robert stood slowly. He was 61, his hair more gray than brown now, his shoulders carrying the weight of his choices. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I made mistakes, Your Honor. Terrible mistakes. I hurt my wife. I made promises I shouldn't have made to Miss Hayes. But when Margaret told me about the baby..." He paused, swallowing hard. "When she told me, I realized what I'd almost thrown away. 33 years of partnership, of friendship, of love that maybe got quiet over the years but never really left." He turned to look at Margaret, and she saw tears in his eyes. "She deserved better than what I gave her. She deserves better than me. But she's giving me another chance anyway, and that baby, that's not a trap. That's a gift I don't deserve but am grateful for every single day." Judge Hartwell was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice carried the weight of her years on the bench and, perhaps, her own years of living. "Miss Hayes, I'm dismissing this case. Not because your pain isn't real, I imagine it is, but because what you're asking this court to do is to put a price on the choice a man made to honor his commitments to his wife and family. That's not something the law can or should do." She paused, and when she continued, her tone gentled even further. "You're 32 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. And my hope for you is that someday, you'll build something lasting with someone, something that goes through years and hardships and boring Tuesdays and difficult conversations. And when you do, you'll understand that what Mrs. Sullivan has isn't something that can be stolen or trapped into existence. It's something that's built, day by day, year by year." Crystal stood frozen for a moment, then gathered her expensive handbag and walked out of the courtroom without another word. Her lawyer followed, already packing his briefcase. Margaret sat still, letting the moment wash over her. Around her, people began to file out, conversations resuming in hushed tones. Robert approached slowly, hesitantly. "Margaret, She stood, placing one hand gently on his arm. "Let's go home," she said simply. As they walked out into the bright afternoon sunshine, Margaret felt the baby move beneath her hand, a small flutter, like a promise. She thought about the judge's words, about the years they carried, about the weight and value of a life built together. They had lost some things that could never be recovered. Trust would take time to rebuild. There would be difficult days ahead. But as they walked to the car together, Robert's hand hovering uncertainly near hers until she took it, Margaret understood something she hadn't quite grasped before. Love, the lasting kind, wasn't just about the passionate moments or the promises made in perfect times. It was about the choice to stay, to rebuild, to honor what you'd built together even when it would be easier to walk away. That evening, as Margaret prepared dinner in the kitchen she'd organized and reorganized 100 times over 3 decades, Robert appeared in the doorway. "I scheduled an appointment with that counselor you mentioned," he said quietly. "For both of us, if you still want to go." Margaret nodded, stirring the soup that simmered on the stove, the same recipe her mother had taught her 50 years ago. "I do, and I called the kids, told them what happened today. They're proud of you, Margaret, the way you handled everything with such grace." She turned to look at him then, this man she'd chosen when she was 25 and hopeful and certain that love would be enough. They'd learned together that love wasn't enough on its own. It needed commitment, work, forgiveness, and patience. But it was still, even now, the foundation everything else was built on. "I didn't do it for grace," she said honestly. "I did it because throwing our life away in anger would have hurt me more than you did. And because—" She placed her hand over the small curve of her belly, because some gifts arrive at unexpected times, and they remind us what really matters. 3 months later, on a cool autumn evening, Margaret gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Their grown children gathered at the hospital, bringing grandchildren who marveled at their new aunt with wonder and delight. The nurses clucked gently over Margaret's age and smiled at her determination and the smooth delivery that proved, as her doctor had said, that her body remembered what to do. They named the baby Grace, and when the nurse placed her in Margaret's arms, Robert stood beside them with tears streaming down his face. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "No," Margaret agreed, looking down at the miracle in her arms. "None of us deserve grace. That's what makes it grace." And in that moment, in that quiet hospital room surrounded by family and love and the weight of years that had somehow brought them to this unexpected blessing, Margaret understood that the judge had been right. What they had built together, with all its imperfections and struggles and moments of failure, was worth more than any court could measure. It was worth fighting for, worth forgiving for, worth believing in even when it would have been easier not to. Outside the window, the autumn leaves drifted down in the evening light, each one falling in its own time, settling gently where they belonged.